Here to take us through the world of commercial real estate is a true expert. She is Michelle Mackay, CEO of Cushman Wakefield. So welcome. Good to have you here, Michelle.
Thanks for having me.
So we've heard an awful lot about commercial real estate in recent months. Not all of it good. Give us your perspective from Cushman Wakefield, because you have a particular way of looking at it.
Yeah, I do. And I think that there's been a lot of dialogue around the idea that there's a bifurcation of assets out there. Higher quality and lower quality. I like to think of it as a trifurcation of the assets. So we have some super high quality assets out there in the office, industrial, and retail sector in particular who are untouchable, right? You saw them get through COVID, they demand higher rents, everything is great. Then on the other bookend of this, you have assets that were struggling before COVID even started. And those assets continue to struggle and may never make it back. The meat of the conversation is around the middle of those markets and the assets that reside in the middle of those markets and how they're performing. And I think that the struggle for all of us is that it's a gray zone out there. We want to say it's good, it's bad, it's bottomed, it's recovered. We want to make a big statement about it, but it's nuanced. We think about some of them having financing that's coming due next year at substantially higher rates. We think about some of them that are owned purely in cash. Some markets could be compelling, like Baltimore, that you and I don't sit around and think about, or San Francisco, in contrast to New York. So I think that what's going on out there is a discovery process whereby people are trying to figure out which assets they want to get involved in, what has value. And at the end of the day, I do believe in 2024, we'll have some distress playing through the system, but that will just be helpful to getting us to the point of resolution.
So it's a large and complicated asset class, but we in the media like to make things really simple. And the question people are asking and addressing right now is, have we bottomed? And are we coming back up yet? We had John Gray from Blackstone just this week say he thinks we have bottomed. We had Mary Daly from San Francisco Fed saying she thinks there's money about to come in. What's your perspective?
Yeah, I think that if you want to say bottomed or not bottomed, you lean to we've bottomed. Because if you're going to make a macro statement about it, I would say somewhere around 80% of the assets are in really good shape, and 20% still have some issues to work through. We know that the Fed is most likely going to come out with some kind of rate cut. Powell's comments last week were dovish, regardless of what's going on with inflation and kind of how sticky it's been. That gives everybody a point of view to think that there's recovery coming. When there's recovery coming and optimism in the real estate sector, people will start to make decisions. That's what takes you out of the bottom.
In investment banking, we've seen a period here where there haven't been as many deals, but people say there's a pipeline coming down the road. We're going to have more deals. Are you seeing that in commercial real estate? Is there a pipeline?
Yeah, I mean, pipeline's been huge in building for probably the last year. A lot of money sitting on the side. I was talking to our chief economist about this the other day and really contemplating that at some point, money managers have to put money out. Otherwise, they've got to return it to their investors. So there's almost like forced decision making that's going to ensue over the course of the next couple months. I also think that transaction volume is going to pick up with the knowledge that rates are going to move. Because remember, you could borrow short term. You could take 1 year, 2 year, 3 year money and refi your mortgage into a more stabilized rate environment.
When it comes to offices, talk about the geography. You mentioned some of the geographical areas, but we hear, for example, San Francisco is very different from Chicago, very different from New York. And don't get me started about things like Dallas or Austin or Florida, Miami. What are you seeing?
I mean, we're seeing certain markets that are doing really well. I think that kind of top line headline is accurate, and you're seeing other markets that are really struggling. I think that when you take a step out of the United States, it's really compelling. I was just in India, in New Delhi. Those markets are doing really well in Asia. A lot of occupancy in the office market, a lot of occupancy here in New York City. We're doing pretty well here too.
So Cushman Wakefield is active not just in the United States, but also Europe as well as Asia.
Yes.
So give us a little bit of comparison there about what you're seeing in Europe, what you're seeing where you're active in Asia as well.
Sure. In Asia, our top markets are India, Australia, Singapore. I love those markets. We do a lot of services business actually in those markets. People aren't as aware of that, I think, as they probably should be. In the UK and in France and Germany, in Netherlands, those are our stronger markets in Europe.
You mentioned services. That's important. Cushman Wakefield, I think it's 55% of your business is services.
It
we
is.
tend to think about the transaction side, not the services side.
Correct.
But that gives you visibility into how some of these buildings are being used.
Yes.
What are you seeing post-pandemic?
We're seeing post-pandemic that actually a lot of buildings, including we manage a huge residential portfolio here in the U.S., very high occupancy. We tend to manage buildings of higher quality, so the information that we're receiving is really based on that.
How is real estate overall changed in the last 10, 15 years?
Yeah, I love this question. We talk about the flow of dollars into the commercial real estate sector over the last 20 years. I've been in real estate a little over 30 years, and when I started, it was one of the only alternatives. You were never considered in the vein of equities or, bonds and debt. I think today it's a core part of every money manager out there, which means there's just more capital behind it. And so in that way, it's changed. But let's talk about the human equation also post-COVID. The way that we talk about real estate, yes, the office conversation has dominated, the work from home, the return to office. But when you think about the ecosystem of real estate, and certainly what we manage, we're involved in hospitals, we're involved in R&D, we're involved in protecting national art collections. We clean universities. I mentioned Harvard to you in our conversation this morning. Real estate is really about what is built and what is out there in the built environment.
It's also about how it's used. Are you seeing changes in the way real estate's being configured in the wake of the pandemic and all the difficulties we've had?
Yeah, people are really reconsidering what has value. And it used to be that you could walk onto maybe any traditional office space and it would almost look like a trading floor, right? A pod, and people were lined up almost like soldiers in that space. Now what you're seeing is more common area, and what you're seeing in terms of services companies like ourselves are groups that specialize in workplace solutioning. How you enter your space, how do you feel when you come into the space, how are you the most productive when you come into it? These are the questions our clients are starting to ask us, not just, can you find me 100,000 square feet? So we have to have the specialists for that. The other way that it's changed is that data is really important in decision making today. So if you and I were to walk down the street and you said, well, I'd like to be in this building, people don't make decisions like that anymore. They want to know, how does the employee get here? How long is the commute? Does that employee have the skills that I want? Where do they live, right? How can I make them come to the office or incentivize to get them here?
It's been a difficult period for commercial real estate. I think everyone would agree to that.
Yep.
Cushman Wakefield's not immune to that.
Yes.
As you look forward now, coming out of this, what's your growth plan for Cushman Wakefield?
So we went through a full pack strategy plan a couple months ago. I came in July, as you know, and seeding growth was a really important component of that. We love our services businesses. We're going to seed it organically. We had been a company that really grew mostly through small tuck-in M&A after we went public. I really like the idea of feeding into our services businesses to grow them directly. We have very talented people in there. We're also going to blow up our capital markets group and really expand that area in terms of growth and talent there as well. I also like some of these megatrends that are playing through the system. We talk about population growth. We talk about data centers. We talk about geopolitical risk. We talk about climate. How do these play through? Well, we've done a whole pack of analysis for ourselves, proprietary, so that we understand where we want to see growth take us forward.
Pick up on one of those climate, because there are real issues as we go green, try to go green, try to reduce emissions, that affects certainly real estate, commercial and also residential around the country, the world. How are you addressing that?
Yeah, absolutely. And real estate constitutes a very large amount of emissions across the world today. One of the things that I think about when I think about these trends, though, is the trend of cooling. It's something that really resonates with me. When we see temperatures swinging back and forth across the world, and you think that normally this season would produce this temperature, but now it's something different. When I intersect all of these megatrends, I think about data's intersection with heating and cooling, and I think about how many interesting options we can have there in terms of producing results for our clients, but also in terms of what might be interesting areas for us to expand into, aside from giving guidance about it.
What about power? Specifically, because that's certainly important to cooling as well as heating.
Absolutely.
Renewables. How do you tap into renewables?
Yeah, I think that tapping into renewables is something that a lot of our clients are looking into specifically. So when they are thinking about wind, when they are thinking about water, when they're thinking about alternate sources, we have to be able to produce a result for them. Quite often what we're doing is analysis around where can they locate if they want to be greener in the way that they're accessing energy in this case. And we have to have the people in our house and that kind of talent. But what that reflects on, and even these questions that you're asking reflect on, is this idea that real estate has really changed. The whole game has changed. These questions weren't being asked of people like me 10 years ago, but the client is asking exactly what you're asking of us today.
Michelle, it's really a treat to have you on. I hope you come back.
Thank you.
That's Michelle Mackay of Cushman Wakefield.